question that I will raise to you, Professor AbuKhalil,
Yes.
is who is it to blame for the massacres that took place in Gaza and other parts of Palestine? Is it the West, such as the United States, or is it the Arabs who basically gave Israel, and no offense to the Arabs, who basically gave Israel the green light to continue attacks on the innocent people of Palestine by them just standing like statues and not doing anything about it? I mean, Israel is just a small country in the Middle East. If you have only 5 countries in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and many more, would stand with Palestine and tell Israel to stop, I know for a fact Israel would have to limit itself, and things would have been, it wouldn't have been, I don't know, it just wouldn't have been that far.
Well, I mean, you're talking to the wrong person here. I mean, I have lived a lifetime working, doing my best against all Arab governments, and if it's in my power, I'll have every single Arab government overthrown. But you cannot in any way distinguish between opposition to Israel and its crimes and to what Arab governments are doing. I mean, Arab governments in 1948 were puppets of Zionism and Britain, and Arab governments in 2009 are puppets of the United States and of Israel, and back then they were receiving bribes from Israel. I mean, Arab governments in 1948, at the head of the Arab military force, which was a joke I should mention, it was headed by King Abdullah of Jordan. The man had a habit of taking bribes from the Zionists. I mean, not a lot. Few £100 here, few £100 there. And if you look at the documents from those eras, you see him writing letters to the Zionists. Please, you know, there's a season coming of Ramadan, and I need to host guests and so on. Send me a few British pounds. And they would send him like £400 and so on. So Arab governments has been puppets of foreign governments, and they certainly have facilitated the Israeli conquest against the Palestinians. And I agree with you that if Arab governments wanted otherwise, Israel would not have been able to perpetrate all these massacres over the years. The best example was in 2006 in South Lebanon. Hundreds literally, of armed youngsters were able to humiliate the Israeli army, the mightiest army in the Middle East. I mean, that is testimony that Arab governments, as you said, would have been able to reverse the trend if they wanted to, but they didn't.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I just want to talk to you about your definition of apartheid. You say that it's based off of racism. Well, first of all, the Arabs, and they're 50% of Israeli Jews are descended from Arabs. They're descended from Mizrahi Jews that were thrown out of Arab countries. So you say that the Arab countries had, the Zionists had the Arab countries in their pocket. Well, why would they encourage them to have 1 million Jews thrown out of these countries, to have pogroms within their countries? You say that the Palestinians were a peaceful people before 1948.
That's right.
Yeah, they were a peaceful people. They met with Hitler to discuss imposing a final solution in Palestine as well. This is documented. Please respond to that.
Okay, 2 points. On the first point about Arab governments and what happened to Arab Jews. Personally, I take no second place to advocating for the equal rights of all groups and for condemning any discrimination against any group, and for standing up and speaking against anti-Semitism, whether it's by Arabs or by Westerners. I want to make it very clear. I am one who insists that our camp, which is the camp of advocating for Palestinians, should be purified from any remnants or vestiges of anti-Semitism. We should reject anti-Semites from our midst. We should not accept someone like Ahmadinejad who makes lultanic statements about the Holocaust. These are not friends of the Palestinian people. And for that perspective, because we should care to establish a state in Palestine, one state, for Jews and Arabs alike, living side by side in full equality, we should also take into consideration the equal plight of Jews in Arab lands. Now, you would say, why, if Arab governments are puppets of Israel, would the expulsion of Jews take place? First of all, the situation of Arab Jews in Arab lands is a complicated story, and the reason for the flight varied from one place to the other. I will get into details with you. In Sudan, for example, yes, the Sudanese government in the 1980s was bribed by the United States in order to let the Jews leave from Ethiopia and from Sudan to go to Israel, because Israel wants the number. Israel is very afraid blatantly about the demographic balance between them and the Palestinians. So they want more of them to come. And in the 1940s and 50s, Israel deliberately, through its intelligence apparatus, had Operation Babylon to terrify and scare the Jewish population of Iraq to flee and go to Israel because they wanted them in their numbers. Maybe you haven't heard about that. Now, having said that, 1 second. May I finish? May I finish? May I finish? Let me continue. Now, the third part is there were Jews who were in Arab countries who were made to feel uncomfortable. And some Arab governments engage in anti-Semitic pronouncement and even laws about land ownership. This is why I am consistent. I call for the return of all Palestinians into their home, in what's today Israel, and their compensation. Look what I said, return and compensation. Similarly, I am for the return of every Arab Jewish person, and I say this in Arabic, not only in English, to every Arab country from which they belong. They were there before some of us were there, and they have, 1 second, let me finish. And they have the right to go back and be compensated. They have the right to go back and be compensated. But let me say the following. The fourth point, this issue of Arab Jews is used for exploitation for propaganda purposes by Zionists in the United States. I'm not talking about you here. But it is done. I mean, I don't know, it could be you, but somebody else. But it's done. Let me give an example. In the 1980s, American Zionist organization were putting pressure on the Syrian government because they said Syrian Jews are locked up in Syria. Let them leave. They should be allowed to leave. And the Syrian government said, but these are Syrian citizens. If they want to stay, they should stay. The American government and the Israelis said, no, they should leave. They should not stay in Syria. So then the Syrian government said, okay, we will let Syrian Jews leave. When the Syrian government let Syrian Jews leave, American Zionist organization said, look, they expelled them. They kicked them out. So I am aware that some Zionists in America are not dealing with this issue in any rational manner. On the second point you make about, and I'm quoting you, they met with Hitler. Now here, our friend in the audience, let me finish. Here our friend is referring by they to one man. His name is Haj Amin. He was a Palestinian cleric and a Palestinian leader at the time. And to his shame, not to the shame of the Palestinian people who never elected that man, he had one meeting with Hitler, which I personally find repugnant. Just as I find the meetings between Zionists and Nazis repugnant. And if you want to read about that, you may read Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, or you may read Lenny Brenner, Zionism in the Age of Dictators. So yes, I will join you in saying, let us condemn anybody who made contacts with Hitler, whether it's the one man who we described as they for some reason, and whether they are they, I mean Zionist leaders of the time. Next question.
I would like you to also address the issue of apartheid that I discussed, that 50%, you say that
right.
The Arabs are being separated from
right.
the white supremacist Jews.
Right.
That the IDF is the white supremacist force. How do you explain that?
I didn't say white, but go ahead. I'll let you finish.
The IDF,
right.
Some of the leading soldiers are Jewish Ethiopians, black Israelis. And that 50% of Israelis are descended from Mizrahi Jews, so they are Arab Israelis.
And yet they are mistreated. And yet there are often accusations that they are put in the front line. Look, if you read Hebrew and you look at the Hebrew press, and if they heard what you just said, they would really find that laughable. Not a single Mizrahim in Israel would ever say that we are treated as equal citizens of Israel. Let me quote to you. This is from an Israeli newspaper, Yedioth Ahronot. This is from last week. An Israeli, not an Arab, an Israeli Association for Civil Rights, that's the name, just released a report in Israel last week. It says, the yearly report describes in Israel as, in Israel, you are allowed to demonstrate as long as you don't shout anything irritating. You can mark memorial days as long as it is not for the Nakba of the Palestinians. You have a right to education unless you are from the wrong sector. You should maintain a good health on condition you have money for medication. And you're welcome to purchase a house on condition that the admissions committee authorizes it on the basis of where you're from. Thank you.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
I recently read about a special highway that was built in Israel.
That's right.
And the amount of bulletproof glass or something like that. I was wondering if you could just clarify that for me.
This is not new. Since Israel colonized the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, it basically created a system of double laws or double justice. In fact, there's a book on that by Raja Shihadi, a lawyer, and it's called Occupier's Law. And in Israel's colonization of the West Bank, there are separate everything. Separate lands, separate roads, separate transportations, and separate laws that apply, separate detention centers and so on. And you're describing the special highways that only, I read about it, Jews can use it and the Arabs are not allowed to use it. So, yeah. That's another example of Israel's apartheid.
No regrets about it, and we did not listen to others who want to tell us about how to be more rational, how to be more peaceful. Look at what we have been up against for 400 years. It's not irrational decisions. It comes with a lot of thinking, preceded by a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of frustration at roadblocks placed in your way by this system in every avenue of your life, that you have to get to the point and say, I'm going to arm myself because I want to be free. I want my people to live a life of dignity and to be able to have the tools to govern ourselves. Sada Shakur was a former member of the Black Panther Party, is in Cuba to this day because they was able to break her out of prison and get her to Cuba. Because this system, this apartheid system here is as vicious and a lot of times was the teacher of those other apartheid systems around the world. So we know what we're up against. We know what we're up against. But we're still optimistic. Even those political prisoners here in the United States who've been there 40 years, they still believe in the power of the people. I hope folks can walk out with that.
Well, I do agree with the quote by Steve Biko, and I think it's very ironic. The colonizers do not accept to take any lessons or cues or ideas about how to colonize. The United States is dropping bombs and rockets on the people's heads in Afghanistan and Iraq without any questions asked, not here in the United States. Second, I think it's very hypocritical. The colonizers want to offer opinion on methods of resistance because they want to disarm the occupied people. The third point, I do believe that people under occupation are the ones who should decide on methods of resistance. And it's not for me in California to tell them about best methods. Having said that, I believe we are obliged, all those of us who count ourselves as members of the pro-Palestinian advocacy movement, to offer opinions and advice to the movement back home about how things are being done.
All right, so